Okay, I'm going to go ahead and get started. First of all, I want to welcome everyone tonight. I want to thank you very much for coming. I would like to do a few introductions, if I could, of Canton staff. We have with us Wendy Trumbull, who's our finance director. Wendy will be speaking tonight along with me. Scott Hilden, deputy chief, is with us. Also, Deputy Chief Newsom, who's with us here. Deb Hansowitz, our Canton Leisure Services Director, is with us. Steve Snyderman, Canton Trustee, is with us in attendance. Tim Foss, Director of Municipal Services. Tim. We also have Chris Stockline, Deputy Chief, Fire Department, Canton, and Josh Meyer, the Fire Chief of Canton Township. Also with us, two people that work very closely with me, Amy Houston and Kristen Thomas from my staff. So I didn't miss anybody, did I? I think I got everybody. What the title of it is Ensuring Canton's Future. And there was an article that came out of the Canton Observer back just a little bit ago on June 29th. And basically it talked about the audit that was just performed by Plant Moran. And basically what they said was that we had a terrific audit, was the headlines here. But they indicated that we still had some money challenges that we had to deal with. But regarding the audit, the auditors found, and Plant Moran gave the township the highest possible rating known in industry terms as an unqualified opinion. Mike Schwartz, one of the partners from Plant Moran, was asked a question, well, where does Canton fit in the whole scheme of things in terms of communities with dealing with finances? And he said he placed Canton near the top, if not the top, among Michigan's communities for its financial position in developing a long-range blueprint as a guide for spending. The point that I'm trying to make is that right now we are in good financial shape. We had good fund balances. We had absolutely a perfect audit, thanks to all the employees at Canton Township, especially the finance department, Wendy and her team. But that's particularly important to understand as we go into this thing. But we have to continue to project out. We can't, by doing so, we would impact property values, our community vibrancy, and our safety. And we just can't do that. What happened to us, as you can see, that back in 2007, we had an economic downturn. We saw property values plummet the wrong way, down. We had a steady decline for 6 years. Currently, home values are showing a slight uptick and are at approximately 2004 levels. That is why the steady decline in taxable value, coupled with the decline of statutory revenue sharing, has resulted in more than $20 million in lost revenue over the last 5 years. The sources of our revenue are somewhat limited, as you can see from looking at on the screen. Tax revenue and state shared revenue make up about 3/4 of our total revenue. We are not a business that can make and sell a product, make more products, or do things a little differently with current products. We're a government trying to be run, believe me, like a business. So again, that $20 million loss has had a severe impact on our community. You can see here that although Canton residents pay their taxes to Canton Township, we only keep about 1/3 of that money. And of that third, you can see that little box off on the right, about 75% of it goes towards public safety. Well, what happened? The Proposal A effect. Here you can see the Proposal A effect. Proposal A limits the property growth on any individual taxpayer to the rate of inflation or 5%, whichever is lower. However, this did not take into account when the values would fall greater than inflation or 5%. So in times of economic downturn, the property tax value can drop significantly, like it did for us, and be as low as 50% of the market value of the property. When the market rebounds, the property tax value cannot increase to the market value. It can only increase by the lesser of inflation or 5%. Therefore, projections indicate that Canton will not return to 2007 values until 2019 or 2020, assuming an average of 3% growth. And frankly, we haven't seen 3% growth in many years, right, Wendy? Several years before we've had that. More like 2.5%, even back several years ago before the real decline. So if you look at this, the Free Press had a very interesting article addressing municipal finance in Proposal A. And if you look down towards the bottom of that, it said if we're not going to allow property taxes to grow at the rate of the economy, which seems reasonable, we have to ask, what are the other options? And it went on to talk about, because of the way Michigan assesses and captures property tax revenue, cities won't recoup, townships won't recoup lost revenue for decades, but costs are fixed and are growing. So here you can see inflation versus taxable value, and you can see how costs are growing while Canton's change in taxable value continues to be negative. Wendy?
This slide up here is just an example of 4 properties within the township in the various subdivisions that are listed below of what the actual taxes were for the general fund for 2013. That represents the lighter blue line. And the darker blue line represents what the 2013 taxes would have been had the taxes just gone up by the rate of inflation during that whole period of time. So we took homes that did not sell, that did not turn over, just to make sure there was a consistent, the uncapping of the home values did not occur. So when you look at this, the first property, what we actually collected in 2013 for the general fund was $409 from that property owner. Had they just gone up by the rate of inflation, we would have gotten $556, so almost $150 difference to the general fund. Carriage Hills, the home there, was about $120 less to the general fund. Oakvale, about $70, and then in Glengarry, almost a $200 difference. So this is just to kind of give you a snapshot of all things steady, what would have happened had we just been able to go up by inflation.
Thank you. So, the actions taken since 2010. When I came on board in 2008, one of my very first acts was to implement multi-year budgeting in order to get a clearer picture of our financial situation. That was when we fully came to understand the impact of the downturn in the economy and how, in turn, impact our revenue. So in order to avoid a catastrophe, we took significant steps to right the ship and put into motion a 3-pronged approach. The first prong was employee concessions. You can take a look at that. Through furlough days, along with eliminating positions, and delaying filling open positions, Canton employees has saved the organization over $7.5 million. That's a significant number. That's what the employees have done. And now we're in our 4th year in a concession mode. Canton employees have also seen their pensions reduced, as well as a reduction in their health care benefits. You can see that we bridged down multipliers for all employees. We had a reduction in unfunded accrued liability that exceeds over $5 million. We reduced health care benefits, 14% reduction in cost of the township, 30% reduction in dental care. in workers' comp, 54% reduction in costs. Not only has this saved us money these last few years, it makes a significant impact on our future legacy costs as well. Other actions taken since 2010, the second prong of the approach in 2010 included a public safety millage increase, and the third prong was an organizational-wide cost-cutting efficiencies. One significant area of cost-cutting was a drastic reduction in capital spending. You can see from this slide what we have budgeted for capital improvement over the last few years. There have clearly been projects and improvements that have been put on hold. These include roofs, equipments, and parking lots. The way I look at it, it's kind of like a family. You know, you're doing things, you're cutting, you're doing all kinds of things, and then you figure, well, you know, we want to take on this project. Well, maybe we'll wait a while. Maybe we'll try to see if we can do it next year. Next year comes, and maybe you don't do it. Maybe you do a few of the things you can do. But you put things on hold. Police and fire. Scott?
All right, thank you, Mr. LaJoy. I'm going to spend a few minutes talking about the Public Safety Department on both the police and the fire side. First, I want to talk about late last year into early this year, we started looking at our 5-year strategic plan. And we do that to try to project out our needs and the service level that we need to provide and ensure that we have the resources in order to do that. The fire chief and the deputy fire chief looked at the fire side, and during the course of their strategic plan investigation, they started to notice some things that were very concerning, and when they went over the data and they looked at, first off here, on EMS runs. As they went through and they looked at the data and looked at our response data, they started to notice that 65% of all emergency service runs were overlapping in 2013. And what we mean by that is that we started to have multiple runs at the same time of the day. And that starts to really put a drain on emergency services for the fire department. And with that starting to occur, they realized that their staffing levels are not maybe delivering the service level that they had wanted to provide to the community. Another point that was identified as part of their strategic plan was what we call the reality of mutual aid. Mutual aid was designed years ago when we entered into agreements with neighboring communities to allow us, in the incident of a catastrophic event or a major incident, to pull resources from neighboring communities together so that we could deal with the event, which would overwhelm any individual community. What started to happen with mutual aid in the last number of years, and we noticed it happening significantly in Canton, is that we were starting to receive a lot of mutual aid requests from neighboring jurisdictions. And we were also starting to ask for a lot of mutual aid service from neighboring jurisdictions. What that means is that current staffing levels are making it difficult for us to provide service 100% of the time to Canton residents with Canton personnel. And as a result of that, we may have multiple ambulances out handling emergency runs. And if we need to request mutual aid, it causes a delay in medical service to the community and the residents. And we may have a 12 or a 15-minute response time from a neighboring community, which, if that ambulance was responding from one of our fire stations, would be a much quicker response time in the 3 to 5 minute range. What the fire chief found out and identified is that on a number of occasions, talking briefly about the advanced life support ambulance response, that our current ambulances may all be out on calls at the same time. And that causes a big concern for us that we're not providing the level of service to the community that we expect from ourselves. Another concern that was identified from the fire strategic plan was that Canton's aging population and our demographics are changing. And as the population ages in a community, you have an increased level of medical service and calls that the fire department now needs to respond to. And SEMCOG has looked at some long-term population changes, and they're predicting a 138% increase in the age group of 60 and over over our future growth in this community. That change in the demographics and the age is going to significantly impact fire service and the amount of calls for service that they respond to. In addition, Canton has slated 2 long-term health care facilities that are going to be built in the very near future, and they hold a very high percentage of elderly population, which will put a lot of high service demands on the fire department. And that's simply going to be something that we need to address so that we can provide the proper level of service to the community from the fire department. The focus on the police department, Deputy Chief Newsom and I and the director, of course, all looked at the police department and looked at what the trends were and what our concerns were with the future of the department. Main focus for the police department is crime prevention, public safety. And we know that, and we take that charge very seriously. One of the things that we identified as a concern to our future and our ability to deal with a lot of the crime problems is looking at new crime trends. And we've got a lot of different criminals are ever evolving in the way that they are stealing and committing their crimes. And we've got to make sure we're responding and have the proper training, tools and resources to deal with those crime trends. One of the things that we've had to eliminate or temporarily suspend are some of our proactive and community-oriented programs. Our Selective Enforcement Unit, which deals with traffic enforcement issues, those officers have had to be reassigned to patrol duties to ensure our service level to emergencies is at the level that we want it to be at. We have temporarily put a limit on the team program. Community relations coordinator position, very important to us to be able to provide a level of service and interaction with the community. All those positions have been put on hold and those people reassigned, and we're looking to restore all of those so that we can deal proactively with community problems and issues, and those are very important tools for us in order for us to complete our job. The other thing that we looked at when we were looking at challenges that we need to overcome, one of them was some additional contractual changes that took place. They resulted in some additional time off to the patrol force, and that actually equated to a loss of about 5 officers, slightly over 5 officers a year as far as real time spent on the road. And so we need to look at that and try to make adjustments in our staffing to, again, provide our service. The next slide here is the fire budget comparative analysis slide. And what we do every year at budget time is we look at how we're doing business and we compare ourselves to communities of similar demographics and size. And this is a slide that represents the fire department, and you can see that the Canton Fire Department, if you look at the total sworn column, currently have 61 total sworn firefighters. The next column over is 0.67. We have 0.67 firemen per every 1,000 residents. And if you notice, in comparison to all the comparable agencies, we have the lowest amount of sworn firemen serving in this community based on the population of all those communities listed. And in the very right column, the cost per capita, if you notice, the cost per capita is the lowest of all the communities on this slide, which shows that the fire department is operating extremely efficiently and at a lower cost to the residents than any of those comparable communities. On the next slide, we look at the police budget, and the same thing, we do a comparative analysis with comparable agencies. And again, you can see that the police department, currently the cost per capita on the far right-hand side, I believe it is the second lowest of all the communities listed. And if we are at full budget you can see that our per sworn is at .95. Currently, we're below that, but again, amongst the lowest of the agencies that we are looking at and comparing to. This slide here is our actual police officer staffing levels per 1,000 residents. And on this slide, what I want to point out is that back in 2003, you can see that our ratio of officers per residence was slightly above 1 officer per every 1,000 residents. Back in the 90s and the early 2000s, we used to use a staffing analysis formula. It was called the Bartel formula. It took in account a lot of different variables, including the amount of calls for service, amount of highway miles in the community, but a very complicated formula, but it gave us a very realistic staffing level of what it recommended for us to have. Back in those days when we used that formula, it always came in close to 1 officer per 1,000. So we always tried to keep our staffing level at about 1 officer per every 1,000 residents. And you can see we did that. 2004, 5, 6, and 7, and 2008, we were operating at or near the 1 officer per 1,000 in the police department. You can see what happens after that, and this corresponds with the downturn in the economy and the loss of our revenues. We started to reduce our workforce, and we've slowly dropped all the way down to currently where we're at .88 officers per 1,000 residents. And if you look at the very bottom of this slide, you can see that we're at .88. The state average is 1.73. The national average is 2.2 officers per 1,000, and the SEMCOG average is 2.4. So again, I think this is a very important slide as it demonstrates and represents how the police department is doing a lot of work, a lot of professional service with very low staffing levels compared to national and area averages. This slide goes back just briefly to some more information on the fire department and the mutual aid requests. If you look here, you can see that mutual aid requests by Canton increased 275% in a 5-year period of time from 2007 to 2012. And in 2007, we had 16 mutual aid requests in the year. You can see 2012 it peaked at 60, and last year mutual aid requests were up to 49. Current staffing allows for the fire department to staff 3 ALS ambulances. That's 1 ambulance per 30,000 residents. The fire department is looking at trying to increase their staffing, and hopefully they can add 3 additional firefighters, which would provide adequate staffing for a 4th ALS ambulance. So I believe that concludes my presentation.
So to ensure Canton's future, when you start talking about the things that are important in a community, it's hard to argue with safety being right there near the top, and the ability to keep, really criminals out of Canton, and to keep it a safe community for our families. And so this is really the main goal of what we're having to do, and the steps that Wendy's going to be taking us through here in a few minutes that we're recommending to take, is about keeping Canton Canton, keeping it the safe, vibrant, family-oriented community that we all have come to know, the something for everyone community, for seniors, for kids, sports, families. However, in order to keep Canton Canton, we cannot continue on the path that we've been on. We can't keep putting off capital improvements. We can't keep our employees on furlough days. We can't have an understaffed public safety. A very recent survey in the community, and this was a survey that was done in cooperation with the Canton Public Library. And it was a statistically valid survey that was completed. 95% of Canton residents rated Canton as great or good. That is because of our safe, vibrant community and our outstanding services provided to our residents. But we need to reinstate normalcy. So when we look out over the next 5 years, we are faced with some concerns. We've already talked about the sacrifices employees have made, $7.5 million worth, and the capital needs that must be addressed. But other concerns are OPEB, pension, and health care costs that have continued to grow as their revenue has decreased. Wendy?
Thank you. So when you take a look at this fund balance projection, this starts out for 2014 through 2018. As we already indicated, we really had a great year. 2013, we ended up very solid, and the township has really made the right decisions and gotten us into a good spot, so we have been able to keep the community levels where they are. So these colors are all kind of blend together here, but the first line is the general fund on each of those years. When you see it at 2014, our total fund balance is about $8.9 million. Each year as we go along through 2018, we're using a little bit more fund balance, and that's really because our property taxes, we're kind of projecting to grow at about 2 to 2.5%, but our healthcare costs and pension costs are going upwards of 10%. Even though we've made some of the reductions that we have, the trend is still to go up. We don't know what's going to happen yet with the national health care, how that's totally going to impact our costs, but we're projecting those to increase at about 10% per year with that. So when you have a 2% revenue growth and a 10% expense growth, those lines are going to cross. But all in all, when you look at the general fund for those years, we are okay at the end of 2018. We're at $3 million. That's approximately a 12% fund balance level. The board policy is to be about 15%, but we think we're okay at the general fund. Really, the areas of concern are the police and fire fund at this point in time. The police would be the second line, and then the fire would be the third column there. As you can see, at the end of 14, we're using up our resources. We're projecting that we're going to use it up. By the end of 15, we're going to be basically zero for both of those, and by the end of 2018, we would be in the hole for the police at almost $9 million, and for fire at about $6.9 million. And that is incorporating the staffing level changes that were already previously discussed. If you take a look now, what I'm sure you all saw, if we were to increase the police millage by 0.75 and the fire millage by 0.75, here's where the fund balance levels would end up being through the end of 2018. So by all means, it's about on par with where we'd be at the end of 2014. But again, that's with taking into account the officers and the fire personnel that would be hired, and some capital that needs to be incorporated as well. So with that increase, at the end of that term, their fund balances would also be between 10 and 15%. It's not above the 15% level. We're just trying to level it off so we would kind of be even where we would need to be to keep Canton where it needs to be. Now, the one other thing that we are going to be doing here is replacing some of the general fund revenue. So currently, what the residents are all paying is 2.366 mils. Of that total 2.366 mils, about 1 mil of every household in total goes towards the garbage collection. What's a little bit different in Canton than the other communities is Canton has always used a mill, one of our general operating mills, to pay for that garbage. And when you look at all of our surrounding communities, and we'll show this on the next slide in a moment here, when you look at the surrounding communities, they all charge a separate fee for it. It's not coming out of their general fund millage. So what we're proposing to do here is before you can see it was a 2.366 mil, the general fund mill is going to go down to 1.366, and it's going to be replaced with a $140 fee on your tax bill. So it's going to show up the same place, but there's going to be a separate line that's going to show for garbage or solid waste collection. And then that money is going to go into a separate fund. It can't be used for anything but garbage collection, and it's just segregating those dollars out, keeping them a little bit separate and putting us on par with what all the surrounding communities are doing. And that amount on the bill would be $140. So if we look at this next slide, to compare that fee to what our neighboring communities are actually charging, Northville Township and City of Northville and Plymouth Township are, 168, 191, 159. Then you look at City of Plymouth, that's $120. There's an asterisk there because they pay that $120, but on top of that, they have a refuse collection millage of 1.92. So actually, it's for a $200,000 home, they're paying $120 plus about another $190. So you're talking about a $300 garbage collection for the City of Plymouth. And then these last four that we compared ourselves to are the largest four townships that we compare ourselves to. So we're, Clinton Township is the largest township in the state. We're the second largest, and we're just comparing ourselves to other townships as well. When you look at this, some of our other neighbors actually charge a solid waste millage. So they would have taken that to a vote of the people and had a mill passed. And in these cases, for example, Westland has two mills. So a $200,000 home, which is the purple line in the middle, in Westland, they pay $200 for their garbage collection. Livonia and Ypsi have a little bit over 2 mills, and Dearborn would be slightly under 2 mills. So really, when you're looking at what we're charging, we're really actually still on the low end, and we're fortunate because we have the landfill here, and we do get a little bit of a discount on our garbage because of that. So we're fortunate that we have that. So what does this mean? So the total tax bill for a $200,000 home in Canton, so that's the market value, not the taxable value. So if your home is worth $200,000, the total township mills before was 10.4. So your total bill was about $1,040. The total mills after, if we do this 0.7 or 1.5 increase for police and fire together, so 0.75 and 0.75, and decreasing the general fund by that 1 mill that we showed, is going to be 10.9 mills total, which would be $1,090 plus the sanitation collection fee of about $140. So overall, for a home with a value of $200,000, that's going to be a $190 increase annually, or when you really break that down, it's about a $15, $16 a month increase or a $4 increase per week if you look at that for the services. This last slide really shows at this point in time where Canton would be if we add up the millage. So this is a little bit confusing, but if you looked at the millage for all these communities that we have on this graph and add to that the solid waste collection fees, and this is based on a $200,000 home. We included Plymouth Township and Northville Township, and you can see there's an asterisk next to Northville, and that's because they have a millage going out to the vote of the people to increase their millage by 1.5 mils. So there's a slightly different color that would increase, their total bill to the residents. But Plymouth Township and Northville Township are significantly smaller in population than Canton. We know a lot of people compare us to them, but the services we offer are different. But we didn't want to exclude them. We wanted to make sure we're being transparent so you can see, because sometimes those things are compared. So Canton's right there after them. City of Livonia, City of Plymouth, you can see going across the board. We're going to end up being at about $1,230 for a home value of $200,000, and the average when you compare ourselves to all those communities is slightly over $1,500. So we're still really lower than our comparable, if you will, but we wanted to make sure people understood that aspect of it as well.
So basically, that's our presentation. The bottom line is that we have to look out. We can't just operating over what's going to happen the rest of this year and next year. And what we try to do is look out into 2018, look out into the future. It served us well in 2010 when we did that, because we were able to make sure that we preserve Canton as a vibrant community that we have today. And in order to maintain that, in order to keep that moving forward, we're going to have to take the actions. And again, what we're talking about for the most part is in public safety. And we're not talking about, adding a whole lot of bells and whistles. We're talking about putting more basic people on the street. We're talking about being creative to deal with some of the crime that's becoming somewhat innovative. So we have to make sure we can address that. So we're talking about doing the very basic necessities to keep Canton Canton. That's what this is about. Any questions? Anybody have any questions for us?
I have a quick question. The projection that you showed up here with the extra mill or however you're proposing.
This one?
Yeah,
Yeah,
right.
yeah.
Does that take into consideration? Are we like forecasting out this average gain of property tax at 2.5%, which has been our historical?
Yes.
So that's in combination. So we're still at a level that we're going to lose 20 million if we don't. Is that my understanding?
If we don't do anything, if we go back, our fund balances, we're going to be a $9 million deficit.
And we're pretty much capped at 3% anyways.
We-
There's no way to go.
We can't go any higher. We are not allowed to go above 5%, the lesser of 5% or inflation. Now, the new growth in the township will help that, but honestly, the last couple of years, when you look at our growth, it's been about 1% has been the inflation. So when you look at that, early on, I'm thinking it could be lower than 2%. Hopefully, the latter part is going up to 3 or 4%, but averaging it out, we just, it's still kind of a shot at.
I'm just amazed at the amount of cuts that you've already made. Looking at your presentation, my expertise in my working life was workers' compensation. I did large multinational Fortune 500 companies, and that's what we did, was try to lower their reserve rates through self-insured programs. And lowering your program by 54% is outstanding. It's unheard of, in industry standards. That's all I wanted to know, make sure that was on the same page.
Thank you. Any other questions? Sure.
So, in terms of property values, took the real big decline in 2007. Where do you think we are in terms of getting back towards that? And I'm sorry, I missed part of the presentation, so I'm probably asking something.
Go the other way. Where we are. The upturn, where we are. This one. So right now, we're, obviously way down at the bottom here. We're not anticipating being back to where we should have been in '07 until around 2020 timeframe. So we've got many years to come before we can hit that level. And that,
So like 2014, it's kind of hard to say what that equates to. It could equate to 2000 or 1998 or something.
well, currently we're at 2004 levels.
2004?
Currently we're at 2004.
My only concern here is that 2007 was such a bubble. Will we ever get back to that? You know what I'm saying? That's my concern, is it was a big bubble. Those property values were so overstated that it doesn't seem like we can ever get back to there. So, is that our goal to get back to that, or are we just
Well,
get as far as we can?
You're exactly right. That's what we're doing, what we have to do. We have to, go out and get additional revenue. One of the slides that we had was just where we get our revenue from. And we're very limited. As you can see, the vast majority of our revenue comes from taxes and statutory revenue sharing. But even in '07, what happened, we had a decline in permits. Building went down, permit fees, and other things that we get. We had a huge decline in that. Now, some of that's starting to come back, and we do have growth. Let me say this. If we do this plan, we are ensuring Canton's future out. We're gonna be in very good shape. I really mean that. Well through 2018, then hopefully we're gonna get a break. We're going to get a break on the rest of the new homes that are going to be built, and some of the other things, hopefully will be in our favor. But we feel this is a step that's very difficult to take, but it's needed, we have to, and we're going to do it.
Yeah, I think it is too. I commend you guys on the job you're doing. I'm just trying to understand, hope I'm not defending my.
Oh, absolutely. We're happy you're here. This time to get the answers to the questions, but
I think this is a real good thing to do. My other concern is on the pension and the healthcare, projected at 10% growth. And what's your feeling for that? I mean, legacy costs like that, they just continue to go up right now. Again, I missed part of the presentation, so maybe you address that.
well, we showed a slide.
10% for 50 years or?
Well, we don't really know what's going to happen with healthcare. I mean, that's still a question. We're assuming a 10% increase. It's an assumption that we're making. But as far as maybe, Kristen, you can go back to the slide on what we've done with. Yep. Some of the things that we've already done is we've bridged down multipliers for all employees, reduced the unfunded accrued liability to the tune of about $5 million. We've reduced health care benefits, 14% reduction, 30% reduction in dental care, and 54% that was just pointed out in reduction in costs and workers' comp.
And our OPEB costs as well, the retiree health care, we got our valuation, and they had expected that to grow by 20%, but because of these changes that we made, we basically held flat that unfunded liability. So it's a huge liability. It's $70 million-ish, so it's a huge unfunded liability, but they expected that to grow 20%. And because of these changes, we held flat this last time around.
And what we're going to be able to do with that is we're going to be able to put about $1 million a year into making sure that, we take care of our obligations. So that's part of the whole plan.
The annual obligation that the actuaries come up with, it's a little tricky. What they say we should contribute is about $8 million-ish, but that also includes what we pay for our current retirees. And so that health care cost that we pay for our current retirees is about $4 million. And then health care is different than pensions. So the state law requires us to fund the pensions. The state law does not require us to pre-fund retirement medical benefits. So we're trying to put some extra money aside to address this, so we don't back ourselves into a bad space. And we've limited no new employees who come to Canton Township will receive retiree health care. So that eventually there's going to be a curve. We put $50 a pay. They received a reduced.
Right.
They have a hybrid plan where it's a 401k DB portion, but it's a very low multiplier for them.
You're welcome. Any other questions? Steve?
Don't mind. Presentation does a great job explaining the costs that we are going to incur in the future, the issue with the funds for fire and public safety, the issues that you talked about with capital. The one thing I don't think it bridges is how this is going to help with the capital requirements. Because you sort of say, well, we're going to stay flat, right? We're just changing the formula, basically.
Okay, so
I
go back to
don't
that.
have a feeling for that.
When we did these projections for the 5 years out for the general fund, that included capital of $1.25 million a year coming back into the budget.
So you raise that.
So we raised that. We increased the OPEB costs, pre-funding to $1 million. So that's really why it's coming down each year, because we have to do some of this capital. We have to do some of this OPEB.
So is the change for the sanitation fund helping that at all?
It's the sanitation budget is $3.4 million a year, and 1 mil brings in about $3.4 million. So that's basically all that's doing is we're segregating this money out and putting it in its own fund to be used for sanitation.
So for the public, why would you say why we would do that if it wasn't for helping with capital projects? Is it just
What this will do is when you compare millages to all of our surrounding communities, because they charge a separate fee, And when you have people who are looking at the communities, they don't look at the fees, they look at what the tax mills are. And so the reality of it is the other communities,
View that's kind of the middle.
right,
You're just saying, basically, we get compared negatively because we don't.
correct.
This isn't something that's going to help with the capital
No.
projects. Right?
No. This is just simply replacing this piece of the general fund revenue, but we did address the capital, and that's why the general fund is continuing to go down.
Okay.
Totally unrelated. Sorry for that confusion.
Any other questions? Anybody else? You sure? No other questions? Thank you very much. Thanks for coming.